Okay, everybody, we're going to begin. So first, I'd like to welcome you to today's distinguished lecture, and thank you all for coming on behalf of the Model Congress Club. I am Harrison Gordon, the Vice President of the club. On behalf of it is within the context of the Dwight-Englewood School's 125th anniversary, and within our club's mission of fostering civic involvement and bringing about discussion of our nation's most pressing issues, that we are honored today to welcome the 2013 Dwight-Englewood Model Congress Club Distinguished Lecturer, Congressman Zimmer. We hope you enjoy today's discussion and you ask questions when the time comes. Now, Edmund Janniger, Model Congress's club president, will say a few words about Congressman Zimmer.
Thank you, Harrison. A great American once said, "Responsibility is the greatest right of citizenship, and service is the greatest of freedom's privileges." Congressman Dick Zimmer is a living proof of these words. Congressman Zimmer was born in Newark, New Jersey, on August 16, 1944. He graduated high school in Glen Ridge and lived in a Bloomfield garden apartment, which he refers to as the New Jersey equivalent of a log cabin. In 1962, he was admitted to Yale College, where he graduated with high honors in political science. He then matriculated into Yale Law School, where he was a member of the Board of Editors of the Yale Law Journal. Following a successful career in corporate law and then in the New Jersey State Legislature, Congressman Zimmer was elected in 1991 to represent New Jersey's 12th Congressional District in the United States House of Representatives. He was chosen by his colleagues to serve on the powerful House Ways and Means Committee. He is the principal architect of bipartisan legislation cutting the capital gains tax. He's the author of the federal Megan's Law and no-frills prisons legislation. He championed the passage of the 27th Amendment to the United States Constitution. In recognition of his accomplishments, Congressman Zimmer was named the most fiscally conservative member of the United States House of Representatives by the National Taxpayers Union and was named the leading Republican thinker on regulatory reform. Congressman, on behalf of every teacher and student, it is my privilege to welcome you to Dwight-Englewood.
Thank you, Edmund, and thanks to all of you for coming out to listen to me. I will just give a few remarks about how I got involved and interested in politics, and a brief description of my political life. And I want to leave most of the time for questions and answers. When I was roughly your age, when I was in my mid-teens, I started to follow politics as a spectator. I really didn't think that I necessarily had what it took to be elected to office, but I was interested in campaigns and candidates, and this is the 50th anniversary, as you know, of the Kennedy assassination. I did follow pretty closely the 1960 election when Kennedy was elected. I was raised a Democrat in Essex County, and Kennedy was not nearly liberal enough for me. I was rooting for Hubert Humphrey, who was his more liberal opponent in the primaries. We can talk more about the Kennedy presidency and my impressions of it later, but it wasn't until I graduated high school and went to Yale that I started thinking seriously about politics, partly because of some political philosophy courses that I had taken, and also because we were getting Lyndon Johnson was president, we were getting deeper into the Vietnam War, and I figured to myself, well, Lyndon Johnson isn't really the kind of person I want to be the head of my party, and I was looking around to see what possible political philosophy I could most identify with. About that time, I applied to be an intern on Capitol Hill after my freshman year, after my junior year, I guess, to work for, I applied to Senator Harrison Williams, who was the Democratic senator at the time, and he wouldn't have me, so I settled for the last elected Republican senator in the history of New Jersey, Clifford Case. he was a liberal Republican back in the day when they had such creatures, and he was a very honorable and wise man. And I thought to myself, well, if this man is a Republican, maybe I should consider the Republican Party. About the same time, there was emerging a group at a few Ivy League campuses called the Ripon Society, R-I-P-O-N, named after the birthplace in Wisconsin where the Republican Party was founded. And as you know, the Republican Party was founded as a reaction to the action taken by Congress, which extended slavery in the United States. And the Ripon Society wanted to, in the days of Barry Goldwater and the Southern strategy for the Republican Party, wanted to remind Republicans that the Republican Party was founded on the conception of freedom and civil rights. And these people were some of the smartest people I ever knew, and they helped convince me that the Republican Party was where I belonged. I was briefly a member of both the Young Democrats and Young Republicans at Yale, but by the time I graduated, I was pretty firmly confirmed as a Republican. And over the years, the more I saw of government, the less I trusted it, and the more conservative, in one sense of the word, more libertarian I became, in that I believe government ought to be small and ought to cost as little as possible. I still didn't think that although I got a degree in political science, that didn't suit me for much after I graduated, except going on for graduate school in political science, which I didn't particularly want to do, or going on to law school. I went to law school to keep my options open. I would advise those of you who are thinking of going into a career in politics, you don't have to be a lawyer to be a politician. And unless you want to study law the way that some people who like anthropology want to study anthropology, or people who like philosophy want to study philosophy, don't spend all that time and money doing it. There are few lawyers who can make a lot of money, but there are way too many lawyers on the market right now. And if you want to be something else, if you want to go into politics, just study what you love, what you care about, and you'll be able to figure out a way to get into politics, regardless of whether or not you have a law degree. Well, I graduated law school. I went to a Wall Street law firm, and I was recruited at that time to be a founder of a new organization called Common Cause, the New Jersey chapter. And the Common Cause was founded after the Watergate scandal, and it tried to clean up government and make it more transparent and more accountable. And they needed some Republicans to bipartisanize the organization, so they recruited me. I ended up as president of New Jersey Common Cause, and rather chairman of New Jersey Common Cause, and found myself lobbying state legislators for open public meetings laws, so that the business of the public is done in public, for ethics legislation, for financial disclosure legislation, so the public will know where campaign contributions come from and how they're spent. And when I started lobbying state legislators, I looked at them and I got up close and I thought to myself, I can do that, and I'm smarter than they are. And that's when I first got an inkling that I could actually run for elected office. By then I was living in Hunterdon County, New Jersey, which, as you know, is quite rural. It's across the Delaware River from Bucks County, Pennsylvania. And I was not a natural candidate in Hunterdon County. Being an Ivy League graduate was not helpful out there. Being Jewish was definitely not. I mean, not having played football with the kids at 100 and Central High School was basically a disqualifying situation. But I decided that I wanted to try to run, and I showed up at every Republican club. And by the way, I would not advise you to get involved in the Common Cause if you want a career in Republican politics, because people thought that that was a left-wing organization, and the Ripon Society, the few people who had heard of it, thought it was an outright communist group. There's few active Republicans out there. But I just showed up, and I worked hard, and I raised money, and I eventually got the nomination to run for the Assembly in Hunterdon County, in part because there was an incumbent Democrat who was considered to be unbeatable, and in fact she was. And I lost that first election, but by a closer margin than people had anticipated, and I just kept running. The Democrat thought that she had done so well getting elected in a normally Republican area. That was the second time she got elected, when she beat me, that she ran for governor and opened up the seat. There was also redistricting, and so in 1981, the year Tom Kean got elected governor, I was elected to the state assembly. Immediately, when I became an office holder and I was able to vote in a fairly conservative way, the people who had opposed my involvement in the Republican Party and my becoming a nominee generally were appreciative of what I was doing, and all of a sudden I was their assemblyman, and it was all was forgiven. When the incumbent state senator passed away, I was able to succeed him in a special election. And then when our congressman decided not to run for re-election, I ran in a three-way primary to succeed him. One of my opponents was Rodney Frelinghuysen, who's currently a congressman, who was a freeholder in Morris County at the time. And then another was Phil McConkey. You're too young to remember this, but Phil McConkey had recently caught the winning touchdown pass for the New York Giants at the Super Bowl. And he was quite a celebrity and a natural politician. People figured that Rodney Frelinghuysen was going to win because his father had been a congressman for 22 years, and he had the support of the entire Republican establishment. But I just worked my tail off and was able to beat him. In fact, Rodney finished third. And then I came to Congress. I was in the minority, and I've said that being in the minority, the difference between being in the minority and being in the majority in the legislature is as profound as being out of office and in office. The majority has like 95% of the power in the House, and now that the filibuster is gone in the Senate, it probably is way more than 80% of the power in the Senate. Although I was considered a moderate Republican because I'm pro-choice and pro-environment, fiscally I was very conservative, and I also felt that we in the Republican Party were never going to take the majority, which we had been in the minority for some 40 years, unless we started throwing some furniture around and started being more assertive, which is why I supported Newt Gingrich to be our leader. Newt, despite his many failings, I believe deserves full credit for the strategy that led to a Republican majority taking over in the 1994 elections. And interestingly enough, Newt not only tolerated Republicans from the Northeast who were less conservative than he was, but he actually embraced us. And And amongst the people who propelled him to the speakership and through the leadership before he got to the speakership were some of the most moderate Republicans in the House, like Olympia Snowe, who, when she was a member of Congress, Nancy Johnson, a very strong pro-choice moderate from Connecticut, and so on. When we took the majority, I was delighted to be on the Ways and Means Committee, which, as you know, controls every tax bill has to originate in the Ways and Means Committee. But more than that, most government spending has to go through the Ways and Means Committee, because most government spending these days doesn't go through the Appropriations Committee, but is accounted for by Social Security and Medicare and other such programs that are handled by Ways and Means. So I really enjoyed that, and when I left Congress to run for the Senate 2 years later, that's what I regretted giving up the most. But I think that if I had stayed in the House, I probably would have been thrown off the Ways and Means Committee by the Republican leadership if I had actually voted my conscience on some legislation like the Part D Medicare benefit, the pharmaceutical benefit for Medicare recipients, which was not paid for, which was fiscally irresponsible in my opinion. I hope I would have had the nerve to have voted no, but if I had, I probably would have been removed from that committee. One of the reasons I wanted to run for the U.S. Senate was because senators, the House is very, as with any body with 435 members, is very regimented, and it's very hard for one individual to make a difference without just staying there for decades and working your way up through the chairs until you're chairman of a subcommittee. On the other hand, in the Senate, given the rules, if you're persuasive enough and if you have a good enough idea, you can get up on the floor, make an amendment, and change the law right there. So I gave up what by then was a safe seat in the House to run for the U.S. Senate against Bob Torricelli, who I think lived in Englewood, and was a congressman from this region. There's a book written about the nastiest political campaigns in the history of the United States, and that Senate campaign qualified for the inclusion in it. All the public polls, all of my polls, and all of Torricelli's polls had it neck and neck when we ran against each other for the Senate in 1996. And some people come to me now and they say, "Oh, I remember that was a very close election," and I reply, "Yes, it was until they counted the votes." It turns out that in 1996, that was the year New Jersey, which had actually been a swing state in presidential elections, leaning slightly more Republican than the national average, decided to become part of the Democratic base. And so Bill Clinton beat George H.W. Bush beat Bob Dole in a landslide that year here. And I was running 8 to 10 points better than Dole throughout the entire campaign, and that's where I finished, and I got creamed because he did much worse than everybody thought. So I was involuntarily out of politics. I went to practice law for a while at Princeton. And then a couple of years later, it turns out there a Democrat got elected to represent my congressional seat. What happened was that the incumbent, the guy named Mike Pappas, a Republican who got elected the year that I ran for the Senate, took to the House floor and sang a song in honor of the special prosecutor Kenneth Starr, Twinkle, Twinkle, Kenneth Starr. And his opponent, Rush Holt, the Democrat, raised $1 million and spent every dime of it showing Mike Pappas singing that silly little song, and with the conclusion, the tagline, "Mike Pappas, out of tune, out of touch." And he got elected. And so I ran against hope for my old House seat in 2000. I got stuck in another Democratic landslide. This time, not only did Al Gore get elected, win big time statewide, but that was the first year that John Corzine was running for the U.S. Senate, and he spent a ton of money, particularly in Mercer County, which is a big piece of my district. And so I lost to Rush Holt by a couple hundred votes. And I figured, well, that's it, I'm done. Took a job for a Washington law firm, and did some lobbying, which is something one does not do if one intends to continue a career in elected politics. Then came 2008. Frank Lautenberg was running for re-election, and the establishment candidate for the U.S. Senate, a nice lady named Ann Estabrook, had a minor stroke and withdrew from the race. After casting about for a candidate, the Republicans who were supporting Ann Estabrook asked me whether I wanted to run. And I said, okay. It was April of 2008. It was way, way late to get started. But I figured that Lautenberg was never terribly popular in New Jersey. It looked as though John McCain was going to be the nominee, and at the time it looked like John McCain was going to run really well in New Jersey. And I figured I had maybe a 20% chance of getting elected to the Senate, which is still, I believe, the best job in the world. So I figured, why not? And I had to beat a couple of Republicans in the primary, which I did, and then ran against Lautenberg. I didn't raise any money, and I knew I wasn't going to raise any money unless and until the race got close, say in October. Well, in October, the financial markets collapsed, and John McCain, who's a friend of mine, handled it very badly and ended up looking less presidential than Barack Obama. The McCain campaign collapsed shortly thereafter in New Jersey, at least, and he got beaten in a landslide. And I was never able to raise money. And even though I ran better, more strongly than McCain did, even though I didn't buy one TV ad, I lost. So now I'm definitely 100% finished, retired with politics, and I can speak my mind and answer your questions, which I'll do right now. Yes?
First, I want to thank you for coming, sharing.
My pleasure.
Incredible insights for all of us to think about in the future of politics. And you need to inspire everyone here to follow in your tracks and get involved. What do you see as the future of the modern Republican Party? It's a party that when I was growing up, L.A. Richardson, I grew up in Washington, and I respected immensely. It seemed like the modern Republican Party had so many answers, so many good answers.
Mm-hmm.
And today, it seems to be, I just wonder where the future lays.
Well, there's a great book I would recommend to you called Rule and Ruin. Came out within the last year. It's the history of the moderate Republican movement and its decline. For a whole range of reasons, politics has become more polarized, and you don't have centrist Democrats or centrist Republicans by and large any longer, and they tend to get wiped out in succeeding elections. So you're going to lose some, I think in 2014 you're going to lose some moderate Southern Democrats, and in the Northeast, I mean the entire region of New England doesn't have a single Republican member of Congress, so because people are moving to live with those who are more like them politically, you've got polarization by choice amongst the electorate. fewer people are splitting their tickets between the presidential and congressional tickets. With the rise of outside spending, you're getting more ideologically oriented groups who are supplanting the non-ideological Republican and Republican Democratic national committees. So I think you're seeing more and more impetus toward polarization. And moderates of both parties are likely not to survive. Now, I didn't like the term moderate applied to me, although it generally was, because, like I said, I'm very conservative. And the reason I'm pro-choice is because I don't trust the government to make decisions about whether a woman has an abortion. And I think most Americans are somewhere like where I am. But the parties are dividing up into the Republicans who are socially conservative and fiscally conservative, and the Democrats who are socially liberal and fiscally liberal. I'm thinking that because Congress and both parties are so unpopular right now, there may be an opportunity for an independent to get elected president. I think that I wonder whether Chris Christie's advisors are looking at that possible route for him, because I think he might be a candidate who would do that. Now, Chris Christie is probably the most conservative conservative governor of New Jersey in my lifetime, but he's considered a moderate nationally these days by present standards. So I think conceivably you could bust up the parties and the way that they operate. California has done something quite interesting, which is to have a primary, I think they call it a jungle primary, where the first two finishers, regardless of party, run off against each other in the general election. This is something that they started, I guess, in Louisiana. And so you're able to, so if you have a left of center district, you might have a moderate Republican who makes it into the runoff because the Republican is getting votes from Republicans, Democrats, and Independents. That it's too early to tell. They've only had one cycle so far in California under those rules, but that may be a way to bring candidates more towards the center.
Is that a possible birth of a new party?
Well, I don't know. I mean, the last new party to make it was the Republican Party. I wrote a paper in college comparing the Republican Party to the Progressive Party of, well, two progressive parties. One in Teddy Roosevelt's Progressive Party, and the other the Progressive Party of 1948, which was a left-wing party to the left of Harry Truman. It's really tough because the two parties have distorted the system to give all kinds of benefits, financial and political, to the incumbent parties. And the Republican Party was created, as I alluded to, by this huge split that split both of the parties of the day along regional lines, along ideological lines because of slavery. I don't see that kind of, the parties are split right now, but I don't see a new issue splitting those two parties. It's one thing to get elected as an independent, it's another to create a brand new party. Maybe if somebody got elected president as an independent, he could create a new party. But you have independent governors of various states, Connecticut, Maine, and they didn't create their own parties. So I don't think so, but who knows? Yes?
What is your moral stance in regard to overspending on political candidates?
I differ from other Republicans, and I don't think corporations are people in that sense. I don't, in fact, when, I recall, when I was in the state assembly, there was a bill which passed to allow regulated companies which were prohibited from making direct contributions in New Jersey which would allow them to create PACs, political action committees, which they could use their corporate funds to sponsor. And I remember I said, if we pass this, we might as well, and this ban on corporate contributions, at least by some corporations, was passed when Woodrow Wilson was president, and what was governor, and was a reformer. I said, if we vote for this legislation, if we enact it, we might as well replace the bust of Woodrow Wilson in the State House with the bust of Boss Haig, the boss of Hudson County. Well, it did pass. But consistently, I felt that I've never been in favor of spending limits on political candidates. I think if you can get small contributions, you know, a whole host of small contributions in whatever aggregate amount, more power to you. What I think is the danger in politics is a contribution or an expenditure in kind on behalf of a candidate, which is so large as to create an obligation on the part of the candidate, or to create the appearance of an obligation. And I can tell you, in Trenton and in Washington, D.C., money does talk. And unlike the assumption that there's big money on both sides of most issues, in fact, there's big money only on one side of most issues, which is why they never become controversial. So what I carry from my Common Cause days is a belief that enormous contributions are dangerous to the system because they can corrupt the individuals involved in it. But even when I was involved in Common Cause, I did not accept the view of the organization that we ought to limit total spending. You can say total spending is too high, but you know, total spending on potato chips is too high. And frankly, now that we've seen the damage done by independent expenditures, I would rather have the money go through the candidates' campaigns and through the national committees so that there's some coherence in the way that the campaign is run. In my last couple of campaigns, there was some independent expenditure money being spent against me and for me. And it's really frustrating to be a candidate and not to be able to control your own message. So that from the candidate's point of view, the current system is in need of some repair. Yeah. Yeah, but by current definitions, yeah. I'd use libertarian, but go ahead.
Your voting record indicates that you supported making partnership here with death penalties, cutting the funding for voluntary prayer, and closing increased border restrictions and supporting the Iraq War. How would you reconcile this with your?
Now, wait a second. I was gone way before the Iraq War. I don't know what you're talking about. I voted for responding to the Iraq invasion of Kuwait, Operation Desert Storm, and that's when one nation sent its troops to invade a second, and was on its way to capture a third, Saudi Arabia. And I thought it was a good way to, it was appropriate for the United States to respond. Although I don't believe that our foreign policy should be dictated by concerns about oil, I did not think it was a good idea for Saddam Hussein to be able to control 60% of the world's oil reserves, which is what he would have done. But let's go in the other things. The death penalty, I think, is an appropriate. You know, I have, you know, the government does make mistakes, and one should be very careful about imposing the death penalty. But in a state like New Jersey, It had an excellent system of getting defense attorneys, both on the public payroll and private defense attorneys, who would defend the people who were subject to capital punishment. There was nobody on death row when the death penalty was abolished here who anybody would argue it hadn't done it, who was innocent, or even had ineffective assistance of counsel. So just as just as a fine, John Stuart Mill said, when you find somebody for a crime, it doesn't mean that you are opposed to private property. And when you imprison them, it doesn't mean you're opposed to individual liberty. And when you execute them, if it's the appropriate penalty, if it's the most heinous kind of murder, it doesn't mean that you're opposed to somebody's right to life. So I think it's an appropriate punishment. I mean, it's an argument that's been fought and lost in New Jersey, and so we're having folks. So that penalty is over. There was something about voluntary prayer. I don't remember that. Yeah.
I think there's a chart of congressional law. I think I made a mistake there. I'm sorry.
All right, and then what about immigration?
I think that the website that I've got this from is that source, but
Was it an anti-Zimmer website? It might. There are such things.
it said that you were for increased restrictions on immigration, you're against amnesty, you're against putting up funding for building a border fence and such.
Well, I did spend more money to, vote in favor of more money to strengthen the border, like in the early 90s, back when there was, and now we're spending like 10 times more than that. I believe in legal immigration very passionately, but I don't think that somebody who broke the law to get here should get preference over somebody who's been waiting sometimes for decades to come through the normal process. I think we ought to increase the amount of immigration that we have, particularly from highly skilled and highly educated people. Yes?
Why do you think this divide or polarization, as you put it, has occurred? Why do you think people have shifted rather than?
Well, I think the polls have indicated that the public hasn't become extreme, but there's a book called The Big Sort about how people have moved into neighborhoods where people think like they do. You combine that with the Voting Rights Act provisions, which require that minority districts stay minority, and so you have a lot of blacks and Hispanics packed into districts that will elect their members, and that, in the terminology of redistricting, bleaches the rest of the districts, makes them more white and more conservative. You also have gerrymandering, where political parties, Democrats in decades past, Republicans in this decade, have maximized the number of people from their own party elected from their districts. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to become more polarized, because as you spread your party membership more thinly in order to get more districts controlled by your party, they're going to become a little more marginal. But the fact is that through these factors and a few others, the vast majority of members of Congress aren't worried about losing a general election as much as they're worried about losing a primary. And the primary will come to somebody from somebody more extreme than they are. My congressman is Leonard Lance. He had a reputation for being very bipartisan and very pro-environment, among other things, when he was in Trenton. Now he's in a district where the most likely way that he would be defeated is by a Tea Party candidate to his right. He's moved discernibly to the right, same person, but different dynamics affecting the way that he acts. And then on the other hand, you have here in Bergen County, you have Scott Garrett, an unabashed conservative who succeeded Marge Rockema, who was a very moderate Republican. I thought that you had to be a moderate Republican to win in Bergen County, but I was wrong. Because Scott Garrett, I think people recognize that he votes what he believes in, and they respect him for that, and they don't vote based on where you stand on various issues, but what kind of a person you are, and they think that he's an honorable person. So there's the whole range of reasons, and I don't see, as I was telling one of your teachers, I don't see why how we're going to find more moderate ground, how we're going to decrease this polarization in the short term. Yes.
You serve on the governor's privatization committee.
Yeah.
Chairman.
Mhm.
Sure about that.
Sure. The governor was interested in learning what opportunity, what functions there were that were being done by the state government that could be done better by private by private parties and private businesses. In this neck of the woods, you have the Bergen-Hudson light rail line that was a public-private partnership where it's pointed to as an example of what privatization can do. There are others. Well, one of the recommendations that we made was that we privatize the way that transportation functions are conducted, and just the mere threat of contracting out toll collection on the Turnpike and the Parkway resulted in the union agreeing voluntarily to cut their salaries by 20 to 25%. They are the contract is about up for renewal, and they may be totally privatized as a result. The question is whether you think that it's the government's responsibility to provide far more than market wages to people like toll collectors, or the first responsibilities of the taxpayers and the riders on the toll roads who pay for those salaries. As you might have gathered, I think that the first responsibility is to the taxpayers and the passengers, the drivers. We also proposed that the management of some of our state-run parks be handed over to private entities with carefully written contracts, so that you don't have our beautiful parks turned into theme parks, but that you pay the operator to do stuff that public employees aren't currently doing, improve the maintenance, improve the efficiency. What? Charter, you said? Yeah, in that sense, yes. I did. Let me think. National forests have a lot of privatization. National parks, not so much. The agriculture department runs the national forests, and I don't know whether you've ever camped in them, but they're mostly quite well run, and at a cheaper price. So there's a whole range of issues in virtually every department. that we identified. And the governor has adopted, I'd say, more than half of our recommendations. Well, the one recommendation I regret that he didn't adopt is that he create a central entity in government to identify opportunities for privatization and to oversee privatization, because it can go wrong. And there have been scandals in New Jersey where privatization has been screwed up by the private company, or where there's been corruption involved in the awarding of the contracts. And if you had a central agency that's able to look out and make sure that the contracts are properly drafted and properly awarded, it would more than pay for itself. I don't think he was interested in setting up another unit of government, being generally a fiscal conservative, so he didn't adopt that recommendation. Yes. Yeah.
Recently, on election day, there was a question on the ballot regarding the tax hike, not tax hike, minimum wage hike. I was wondering where you stand.
I voted no, because although the government can force an employer to pay a minimum wage, the government can't force an employer to hire somebody at that wage. And as you have learned or will learn in economics, if you are increasing my profit by $8.50 an hour, I can't afford to pay you $10 an hour. And so I won't hire you, or I'll replace you with a machine that will work more cheaply. And right at the if the minimum wage is low enough in a high wage state like New Jersey, it's really doesn't make much of a difference. But the higher you post it, the more it results in unemployment amongst the most vulnerable populations, the uneducated, the inexperienced. Beyond that, the vast majority of people making the minimum wage are not breadwinners for their family. They're teenagers or people working part-time to supplement family income. So if you're concerned about low wages, I would much prefer something like the Earned Income Tax Credit, which benefits people based on need and based on and supplements the earnings of people who are actually working, rather than forcing the employers to pay a minimum wage when they're not being forced to actually hire people at that wage. Yes.
Do you think for a Republican to be president again, they'll have to become more socially liberal?
No. I don't think. I used to think that when I was with the Ripon Society. I thought, the reason we weren't electing people was because they weren't socially liberal. Then we elected Reagan, we elected George W. Bush. There are other issues that are more important to voters than some of those social issues. And the fact is that that pro-life people have become an essential part of the Republican coalition. And although I'm pro-choice, I can't see the Republican Party nominating anybody in the foreseeable future who's not pro-life. Yes?
President Obama obviously believes in the Affordable Care Act.
Mhm.
His decision to postpone the individual mandate is more political than what he thought would be the right.
I think it was a panic. He did it out of panic because he was in a couple of days he was about to lose a vote in the House, which would have extended for 1 year the non-conforming health care insurance policies. There were some estimates that if he did nothing, he would have lost 100 for Democrats. In the end, he lost 39 or something. So I think that's what he did. But of course, it's not a substantive fix to the problem for all the reasons that you're aware of. It just postpones the tax increase is, the premium increases to a month before the next congressional election, which is bad timing. It caught the insurance regulators and the insurance companies completely unaware, and many of the regulators are saying we won't allow it in our states, and then the insurance companies say we just can't do it now. And so it looks like a political gesture which doesn't have much real-world consequence. I don't know what else he could have done, but it looks like he panicked. It looks like, this is a kind. It's similar in a way to the decision that he made to go to Congress before bombing Syria. He had signed off with the Secretary of State, with the Secretary of Defense. They were going to bomb Syria, and then he goes for a walk with his chief of staff, and he changes his mind, and he looks indecisive and weak, and it's not great for American credibility either. So this is a guy who who I've always thought was quite cerebral and quite strategic in his thinking, but it's disappointing that in two important judgments he sort of made them on the snap basis after he felt he was pushed into a corner.
So we're actually, I'm so sorry, we're actually at the hour. I just want to make sure that students who have to go to class have the chance to do that, but if possible,
No, I'll
maybe
stay.
folks
I'll stay.
Okay, great, so maybe just a round of applause first.
I also wanted, on behalf of the school, on the.
Oh, you have to go. Huh?
Yeah, no, I don't have to go.
Oh, all right.
But I think some of them have to go
Oh, okay.
to present you just with a couple of
Oh,
gifts.
thank you so much. Thank you.
For the insightful conversation.
I was just asked whether the Senate Democrats were justified in changing the filibuster rules. Sort of, but this is one of these issues where if you just when the Democrats were in the minority and the Republicans were in the majority, they were making exactly the opposite arguments. And in fact, during the debate yesterday, they were quoting each other from 2005, not from 100 years ago, but from 8 years ago, when this was being considered by the Republicans. I think I don't know whether they were justified. I'm sure they worked themselves up into thinking they were justified, but I heard Senator Levin's speech on the floor of the Senate after it was done. Senator Levin is a total liberal Democrat from Michigan, but he's been around long enough to have been in the majority and in the minority, and he felt that it was a really bad idea in the long run for the institution. And I thought when my party was threatening to do away with the filibuster, that it was a bad idea because my party would live to regret it. The filibuster abuse has escalated, and you can blame one party or the other, and everybody uses it more and more. But there was although it was not deliberately, the filibuster was not deliberately instituted as part of the Senate rules, and it sort of got there by accident when they rewrote the rules. The result was that it forced a supermajority to support important things, and it forced bipartisan results. And when it worked, it worked to create something with a greater acceptance. Now, let's say Obamacare had to have gotten 60 votes in order to pass. It was passed through a procedural maneuver where it only required 51 votes. If it had required 60 votes, a number of Republicans would have had to buy into it, and we wouldn't have had this warfare we have on the issue now. It may or may not have been a better program, but it would have been a more bipartisan program. You know, there are a lot of ways that things can get slowed down in the Senate, and I think the Republicans will be exercising that option starting today. You can request that proposed legislation be read in its entirety. You can refuse to give unanimous consent, and that's a very interesting thing. 60 isn't the magic number so much in the Senate as 100. Any member, if he opposes unanimous consent to just do the most routine things, can bollocks up the entire framework, and that's not going away. So I had heard that, you know, the last time this was threatened, Republicans said, we're going to shut down the place, we're going to burn down the Senate. They can do it if they want. I don't know whether it serves their purposes, but, and I don't know how you know, if I were a Republican, I probably would vote with my team, but I think I would have voted against my team back when the Republicans were in the majority, because I just didn't think that it was conservative in the sense that Edmund Burke would define the term, which is not changing institutions which have built up functionality and acceptance over the generations. Sorry. Yes. Yeah. That's a good point. Reading the legislation, I didn't realize how aggressively it would be enforced. I think the Patriot Act was 90% unexceptionable, but that obviously the way that it's being used now, it requires. Well, what I think Congress needs to exercise more actual authority over all the intelligence agencies, CIA, NSA, et cetera. You know, so I can't remember what it was in the Patriot Act that which provisions we were debating at the time. But I do think that most of it is good, but that any tangible thing provision, certainly as construed, is ridiculous. Needs to be reined in. Guess we've run out of questions. Oh yes, okay.
Many of them are whether the Tea Party, Libertarian, members of the Republican Party. If many of their proposals do the pardon that they have difficult time translating these more simple messages to the population as a whole. Because one big complaint we often hear is that targeting conservative gives a hard message itself to a more complex argument.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, liberals are able to be persuasive because they want to help you. They want to help you by taking somebody else's money and giving it to you, but they want to help you. It's often conservatives come across as mean-spirited or vindictive, tightwad. Scrooge was a tightwad with his own money. So I think you really do need somebody who's able to make this a positive message, explain the benefits of the affirmative benefits of liberty and freedom, economic growth that comes from economic sometimes Republicans are given a gift, like this screwed up nature of Obamacare, but we've got to be more than just against bad stuff. We've got to be in favor of a vision of what America